Don't underestimate women and the growing support they're providing to the WNBA. Remember, anything successful, you usually have the women behind it supporting the product.
Don't underestimate the NBA subsidizing.
The NBA and the NFL went to another level once they appealed more to women. What if the women decide we gonna focus and lock in on the WNBA?
No, the NFL started growing once they implemented.
There is a recording spreading across the internet right now that has sent the WNBA into a full-scale emergency. Nobody inside the league office saw it coming. Nobody had a plan ready. And now, with television executives breathing down their necks, with Adam Silver reportedly being pulled into conversations he never expected to have this season, and with millions of fans demanding answers, the most important women's basketball league in the world is scrambling to contain a story that gets bigger with every passing hour. What started as a physical confrontation on a basketball court has turned into something the league may not be able to walk back from. Leaked audio, disputed quotes, a statement so explosive it trended across every major platform within hours, a financial collapse the moment one player left the floor, and a teammate who threw a political grenade directly into the middle of it all. This is not a small controversy. This is the kind of story that changes how a league is run, how it is covered, and how it is remembered. And it is happening right now, in real time, with no end in sight. Before any of this made sense, you had to understand what Caitlin Clark actually did to this league. Not what people say she did, not the narrative pushed by either side of an increasingly bitter argument, what she literally, statistically, undeniably did to the WNBA from the moment she arrived. Caitlin Clark did not arrive in the WNBA quietly. She did not ease herself in, earn her stripes slowly, or wait for veterans to give her permission to matter. She walked in and immediately became the most talked about, most watched, and most commercially significant player the league had seen in decades. Rookie of the Year, fourth in MVP voting in her very first season, a player so gifted, so naturally compelling to watch that comparisons to Steph Curry started coming from people who had spent their entire careers analyzing basketball at the highest level. People were saying she could pull up from anywhere on the floor and make it look like a layup. That kind of talent does not sneak up on anyone. It lands like a thunderclap. But here is what made her arrival complicated in a way that had nothing to do with basketball. The WNBA had been home to exceptional players for years before Clark ever laced up a professional shoe. Brilliant athletes, physical specimens, women who had dedicated their entire lives to a league that the broader sports world had largely ignored. Players who were objectively outstanding and were getting a fraction of the attention, a fraction of the ticket sales, and a fraction of the media coverage that Clark generated almost overnight. And a significant number of those players happened to be black women. That reality did not go unnoticed. It went noticed loudly, publicly, and with a level of frustration that had been building for a very long time. The conversation that followed was honest and uncomfortable at the same time. Some analysts pointed to Clark's fan base, her college following, and yes, her identity as a young white woman as factors contributing to the scale of her crossover appeal. Others pushed back and said the focus on race was overshadowing genuine athletic brilliance and that the league should have been celebrating the attention rather than debating who deserved it first. Neither side was entirely wrong. Neither side was entirely right. What was clear was that the wave Clark created was real. The financial impact was undeniable, and the emotional reaction from within the league itself was complicated in ways that locker room walls could not contain forever. Ride the wave, some said. Rising tide lifts all boats. But not everyone in that locker room felt like they were rising. Some felt like they were being erased. And that tension, simmering quietly beneath the surface of a record-breaking season, was about to find a very public outlet. When Caitlin Clark and Brittney Griner shared the same floor, something shifted. It stopped feeling like a regular season basketball game almost immediately. The physicality was not subtle,
It was not incidental. It was aggressive, sustained, and visible to everyone watching, whether in the arena or at home on television. Griner's size and strength made her a uniquely difficult defensive presence for Clark to navigate. Every time Clark tried to create space, find her rhythm, or attack the basket, she was met with contact that went beyond what most viewers considered normal defensive pressure. Broadcast commentators noticed, former players noticed, fans with no prior investment in the WNBA noticed because the replays kept coming and the fouls kept not being called.
Before she ever came along, there were a lot of outstanding basketball players who happened to be black females that was doing their thing on the WNBA level. And they never got this kind of shine. This girl, the Golden Goose, comes along and she wreaks havoc. She's the Rookie of the Year. She's 4th in the league in MVP voting. 4th in the league.
The officiating during that game became the central argument almost instantly. Analysts who had spent years covering the league were saying the contact should have drawn flagrant foul calls at minimum. People pointed to specific moments frame by frame and argued that what they were seeing was not competitive basketball defense, but something closer to controlled aggression designed to send a message. Others pushed back hard, saying Griner had thrown her own fouls in earlier games, that physical play is part of professional basketball for everyone, and that singling out Griner's defense as uniquely problematic was selectively outraged nonsense. The debate was loud, it was everywhere, and it was not going away. National sports programs cleared their rundowns to cover the confrontation. Social media was flooded with posts from viewers who felt Clark was being deliberately targeted beyond what the rulebook permits, and others who felt the entire conversation was being framed in a racially coded way that was unfair to Griner and other veteran players. Inside both organizations, the intensity was creating friction that team officials were working to manage quietly. Outside both organizations, that quiet management was failing spectacularly. Every hour that passed without a clear statement from the league made the situation worse. And then something happened that made everything worse still. Nobody has authenticated the audio. That needs to be said clearly and upfront before anything else. What has spread online is an alleged locker room recording from the post-game environment following the Clark-Griner matchup, and the recording itself has not been independently verified by any credible outlet. The context surrounding whatever may or may not have been said remains disputed. The full picture of what happened in that room, if anything significant happened at all, is still unclear. That is not a small caveat. That is the entire foundation of the story. With that said, here is why this unverified claim became one of the biggest sports media stories of the year anyway. Reports began circulating, second-hand accounts and transcripts shared across platforms, claiming that Griner became visibly upset after the game when questions about officiating, her defensive approach, and the public portrayal of her playing style continued to surround her. During whatever exchange may have taken place, she was allegedly quoted as saying the following, "I'm a grown man. Stop acting like I'm not allowed to play my game." That wording entered the online conversation like a match hitting gasoline. Podcast hosts picked it up within hours. Commentators with millions of followers began building entire episodes around it. Influencers who had never previously covered women's basketball were suddenly posting takes. Viewers who had been casually following the Clark controversy were now deeply invested in a single disputed quote that nobody had been able to prove actually happened the way it was being described. The phrase, "I'm a grown man," became a flashpoint not because its authenticity had been established, but because of what people believed it might mean, what it might reveal, and what it said about everything that had been building in this league all season. The WNBA was now dealing with a crisis built almost entirely on something they could not confirm, deny, or control, and that is arguably the most dangerous kind of crisis any organization can face. When a controversy reaches the level where the NBA commissioner's name starts appearing in the reporting, you know the situation has moved beyond standard league management territory. Adam Silver was reportedly facing pressure from television broadcast executives who have enormous financial stakes in both the NBA and WNBA ecosystems to become directly involved in addressing what was happening. The nature of that involvement, what form it might take, and how far it might go were all being discussed behind closed doors while the public story continued escalating.
Reports suggested that internal conversations at the senior level were focused on several possible responses: formal inquiries into the alleged recording and how it reached the public, potential disciplinary action aimed at restoring a sense of accountability, new policies targeting the kind of physicality that had been on display during the Clark-Griner game, an aggressive public communication strategy designed to shift the media narrative before permanent damage was done to the league's brand. None of these conversations had produced public announcements yet, which meant every hour of silence was being filled by speculation, and that speculation was not flattering. What made the league's position uniquely difficult was the timing. The WNBA was in the middle of what should have been its greatest commercial moment: broadcast agreements of historic scale, sponsorship relationships with major brands that had never previously invested seriously in women's basketball, audience numbers that were rewriting what anyone believed possible for the league. All of that progress, all of that momentum was now being threatened by a controversy the league had not created but could not seem to escape. Senior officials understood that a weak response would be interpreted as indifference toward player safety. An overreaction might be seen as politically motivated or unfairly punitive. The window for getting this right was narrow and shrinking fast. And right in the middle of that window, Caitlin Clark came back and played one of the best games of her young career, which made every decision the league had been delaying suddenly feel urgent and unavoidable. If anyone still needed proof of how much weight Caitlin Clark's presence carries in the WNBA economy, the ticket price data that emerged during her injury absence made the argument more clearly than any broadcast rating or attendance figure ever could. Clark was sidelined for 2 weeks, and in that short window, ticket prices for the Indiana Fever away games dropped so sharply that the numbers became a story on their own. Before her injury, the lowest available ticket for the Fever's matchup against the Chicago Sky was listed at $86. The same kind of seat for a game in Washington was priced at a similar level. When Clark was ruled out, those prices did not slide gently. They fell hard, dramatically enough that Yahoo Sports and TickPick were both tracking and reporting the collapse in real time. This is the context that makes the Griner controversy, the alleged recording, and the ongoing tension around Clark's treatment on the court so commercially explosive. The WNBA had publicly projected that it would generate $1 billion in revenue for the first time in its history. $1 billion. That projection was being built on a foundation of growing audience numbers, expanding media rights, new sponsorship deals, and the unmatched drawing power of one 22-year-old from Iowa. When that player cannot play for 2 weeks, ticket prices fall off a cliff. When that player is the center of a physical confrontation that generates national controversy, the league's credibility is on the line. When an alleged recording surfaces suggesting something explosive was said behind closed doors about that player behind closed doors, the entire billion-dollar projection starts looking fragile in a way that makes executives very nervous, very fast. A rising tide lifts all boats, someone had said earlier in the season. The ticket data from those 2 weeks told a different and much more uncomfortable story. The tide did not lift all boats equally. It was being generated by one engine, and everybody in a position of power within the league knew it.
Just as the WNBA's communications team was attempting to reduce the temperature around the Griner situation, another voice stepped into the center of the story and made everything simultaneously more complicated and more fascinating to follow. Sophie Cunningham, Indiana Fever guard and one of Caitlin Clark's most outspoken teammates, had already built a reputation as someone who said exactly what she believed without calculating the consequences particularly carefully. She had been visibly and vocally supportive of Clark throughout the most contentious moments of the season. She had stared down opponents, made her defensive presence known, and positioned herself as someone who was not going to stay quiet while her teammate was targeted.
But what Cunningham said in an interview with ESPN went far beyond the basketball argument. She spoke about her belief in the importance of protecting young girls in sport, and stated clearly that she does not think biological men should be competing against biological women. She was not ambiguous. She was not hedging. She said what she said, as she put it herself when reporters followed up the next day. When asked if her comments were controversial, she pushed back on the framing entirely. She described her position as common sense. She said she would always believe it. She said there is room to love everyone and that her views did not come from a place of hate toward anyone. The reaction was immediate and entirely predictable given the current climate. Some people stood with her loudly and publicly, sharing her quotes as examples of an athlete willing to speak an uncomfortable truth, while most of her peers stayed carefully silent. Others condemned her statements as harmful to the trans community and argued that using the language of child protection to frame opposition to trans inclusion was a well-documented political strategy rather than a sincere expression of concern. Cunningham did not appear to be particularly troubled by either reaction. She stood on what she said. She was not backing down. What made this moment particularly significant for the broader controversy was the layering effect it created. The story was no longer just about a physical matchup and an alleged recording. It was now about officiating standards, executive accountability, financial vulnerability, racial dynamics, and a political debate over gender in sport, all happening simultaneously inside one league in one season. The WNBA was not just managing a PR problem, it was sitting at the intersection of nearly every major cultural argument in American sports, and every new development was adding another layer that made a clean resolution harder to imagine. Strip away the specifics of the alleged recording, the disputed quote, and the individual personalities involved, and what you're left with is something much larger than any single controversy. The WNBA in 2024 and beyond is fighting for something it has never had before and is not yet sure how to hold on to: legitimacy. Not the kind that comes from a press release or a milestone anniversary, the kind that comes from sustained audience investment, consistent media coverage, financial independence, and the belief among players that the league they are building their careers in is actually capable of protecting and respecting them. The officiating argument at the center of this controversy is real, regardless of what did or did not happen in any locker room. Players and analysts with no particular stake in the Clark conversation have been raising concerns about inconsistent foul calling, inadequate protection for skill players, and the gap between what the rulebook says and what officials are actually enforcing in real time. Those concerns existed before Clark arrived, and they will exist after this specific controversy fades. But Clark's presence has given those concerns a spotlight that they never previously had, and the league's response to that spotlight will define how the next generation of talent, investors, and viewers perceive the institution. The financial picture adds another layer of pressure that cannot be ignored. A league that is projecting a billion-dollar revenue year but watches ticket prices collapse the moment its most marketable player sits out 2 weeks is not yet standing on a diversified foundation. It is standing on a phenomenon. And phenomena are wonderful while they last, but they require institutional support, thoughtful management, and a culture of genuine respect for the athletes generating that value if they are going to translate into something lasting. The conversations reportedly happening at the senior level of the league and the NBA are not just about this controversy. They are about the infrastructure surrounding this moment of growth is strong enough to survive the inevitable moments when the story gets difficult. And Sophie Cunningham's comments added something else entirely. They reminded everyone watching that the players inside the WNBA are not a monolith. They are individuals with different backgrounds, different beliefs, different relationships to questions of identity and inclusion, and different ideas about what the league should represent. Managing that reality, while also managing a media crisis, a financial dependency question, and an officiation debate, is not a communications problem. It is a governance problem, and governance problems do not get solved by a carefully worded statement.
Here is what we know for certain. The WNBA is at a crossroads unlike it has faced before. It is experiencing historic growth and a historic crisis in the same season, and the two things are not unrelated. The attention that made this moment possible is the same attention making it so difficult to navigate. The player driving the revenue surge is the player at the center of every controversy. The colleagues being asked to coexist with that dynamic are reacting in ways that are honest, human, messy, and impossible to contain once they leave the building. The alleged recording may be authenticated or it may not be. The quote may have been said exactly as reported, or it may have been taken completely out of context, or it may never have happened at all. Adam Silver may intervene formally, or he may work quietly through back channels, or he may choose to let the WNBA handle its own situation without direct NBA involvement. Cunningham may face consequences for her statements, or she may not. Clark will keep playing and keep drawing millions of viewers, regardless of how any of these individual threads resolve. What will matter most in the long run is whether the people running this league use this moment to build something more durable than a single player's star power. Because the real question this controversy is asking is not about Brittney Griner or Sophie Cunningham or even Caitlin Clark. It is about whether the WNBA has the leadership, the infrastructure, and the genuine commitment to its players to turn the most turbulent season in its history into the foundation for something that actually lasts. And based on everything we have seen so far, that question does not have an answer yet.